They say that you can live with someone every single day of your life and still not truly know them. You can share a bed, share meals, share children who can build an entire world together, and yet that person can remain fundamentally unknowable, a stranger wearing a familiar face. But what happens when you discover that the person you've devoted to decades to isn't just a stranger, but something far more sinister? What happens when you realize that the life you've been living alongside him is built entirely on fraud, deception, and the systematic betrayal of everyone who trusted him? I used to believe that love gave you insight, that if you loved someone deeply enough, you could see through their masks, penetrate their defenses, know their soul. I was wrong, my dears, terribly, devastatingly wrong. Love doesn't grant you insight. Love blinds you. Love makes you complicit in your own destruction because you're so desperate to believe that the person you love is fundamentally good. For 20 years, I was blind. For 20 years, I lived with a man I didn't know at all. And when my eyes finally opened, when I finally saw who he truly was, the truth was so shocking, so multi-layered, so deeply evil, that I've spent the last 3 decades trying to understand how I could have been so blind. My name is Constance Marie Fitzgerald, though everyone in my life has called me Connie. I'm 76 years old now, and this story happened in 1988. Though the foundation of it was laid long before that, back in 1968, when I married a man named Douglas, a man I thought I knew completely. Before I continue, my dears, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're watching from. I do so love hearing from people all over the world who watch my stories. This is perhaps my most difficult story to tell. Now let me take you back to 1988, the year I discovered that I'd been living with a complete stranger. Maple Ridge, Vermont. Population 4,100. A picture postcard New England town with white churches and covered bridges. Autumn foliage that looked like God had painted it himself. And the kind of tight-knit community where everybody knew everybody's business. Douglas and I had moved there in 1975, 13 years into our marriage, when he'd taken a position at the local bank Maple Ridge Savings and Trust as vice president. Douglas was impressive, handsome in that distinguished way that only improves with age. He had silver at his temples by his 40s. He wore 3-piece suits to work. He had a presence about him when he entered a room. People noticed. People respected him. People trusted him. We had 3 children together. Elizabeth, who was 21 in 1988. Michael, who was 18. And Sarah, who was 14. They were good children. Elizabeth was in her junior year of college at the University of Vermont, studying business administration. Michael was a senior in high school, already accepted to Yale on a scholarship. Sarah was a straight-A student, captain of the volleyball team. The kind of girl every parent dreamed of having. I was a registered nurse at Maple Ridge Medical Center. I'd worked the same position for 12 years. I was respected, efficient, professional. Douglas was vice president of the bank. We lived in a beautiful Victorian home on Cherry Hill, the best address in town. We drove a Mercedes sedan. We took vacations in Martha's Vineyard every summer. We hosted dinner parties where everyone wanted to be invited, not to look at us from the outside. You would have seen the embodiment of the American dream. A powerful man at the height of his career, a devoted wife supporting her family, 3 accomplished children following in their parents' footsteps, a marriage that appeared unshakable, built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine love. But inside that beautiful house, inside that seemingly perfect marriage, there was a rot so deep, so extensive, that when it finally came to light, it would destroy everything we'd built. Looking back now, I can see them everywhere. The moments I should have questioned, the inconsistencies I rationalized, the lies I chose to believe because the alternative was unthinkable. The first thing was Douglas's increasing distance, not just emotional distance, though there was plenty of that, but physical distance too. He'd spend hours in his study with the door closed. He'd take late-night business calls that never seemed to involve actual business. He'd go on banking conferences that required him to be away for entire weekends, often without his family. "Don't you want us to come with you?" I asked once. "It's just work, darling," he'd say, kissing my forehead. "Tedious financial seminars. You'd be bored to tears." I accepted this explanation. Husbands went on business trips. That was normal. Then there were the financial inconsistencies. Money that didn't match up. Accounts I wasn't allowed to see. When I'd ask him about our finances, Douglas would become irritable. "I'm the vice president of a bank, Connie," he'd say sharply. "I think I know how to manage money better than a nurse." The condescension stung, but I accepted it. Men handled finances. That was the way things were done. There were also small behavioral oddities. Douglas became obsessed with his appearance in a way that seemed excessive. He'd spend 45 minutes getting ready in the mornings. He'd buy expensive cologne bottles and bottles of it. He'd have secret shopping trips to Boston, where he'd return with tailored suits and Italian shoes. Things that seemed far too fashionable for a small-town banker. "Why do you need so many clothes?" I asked once, noticing that he seemed to have entire wardrobes I'd never seen him wear. "A man in my position has to present himself well," he said. "It's expected." It was true. It was reasonable. And I let it go. Then there was his relationship with Father Michael Brennan. the priest at St. Catherine's Church, where we attended Mass. Douglas and Father Brennan became very close. They'd have lunch together regularly. They'd spend hours in private conversation after Mass. Douglas would speak of Father Brennan with an unusual amount of admiration and affection. Father Brennan is going through a difficult time, Douglas told me once. I'm helping him spiritually. That's kind of you, I'd said. What I didn't know was that Douglas was helping him in a very different way. What I didn't know was that Douglas was using his position at the bank to help Father Brennan access accounts that didn't belong to him. What I didn't know was that my husband and the priest were engaged in a fraud scheme so elaborate, so systematic, that it would eventually bring down the entire financial institution. But I was blind. I was so devoted to maintaining the illusion of my perfect life that I refused to see what was right in front of me. Little did I know that my blindness was about to cost me everything. It happened on a Thursday evening in May 1988. I'd worked a double shift at the hospital, a 12-hour shift that had left me exhausted. I came home around 9 p.m., wanting nothing but to shower and sleep. Douglas was in his study. He'd said he'd be working late. I left him a note that I was home and headed upstairs to shower. But then I remembered that I'd left my work badge at the hospital. I needed it for tomorrow's shift. I'd have to call ahead so they could leave it at the security desk. I went back downstairs to use the phone in Douglas's study instead of walking upstairs. The door was partially open. I was about to knock, but I heard voices, 2 of them, Douglas's and someone else's. They were arguing. You said you could cover it. A man's voice hissed. You said the audit wouldn't find anything. It's too late now, Douglas said, and he sounded panicked in a way I'd never heard before. We need to destroy the records. We need to move the money again. If they find out, we both go to prison. Both of us, Douglas. Is that what you want? Do you want to lose everything? Of course not, Douglas snapped. I just need time. I need to figure this out. I stood frozen in the hallway, not understanding what I was hearing. What records? What money? What audit? I knocked on the door. Everything went silent. Then Douglas opened the door, and his face went pale when he saw me. Connie, he said, I didn't hear you come home. Behind him, I could see Father Michael Brennan standing by Douglas's desk. He looked equally shocked to see me. I didn't mean to interrupt, I said slowly. I just needed to use the phone. I left my badge at the hospital. Of course, Douglas said, but his voice was strained. Let me step out so you can use the phone. Father Brennan and I were just discussing some church fundraising matters. Church fundraising at 9 p.m. on a Thursday night, while Father Brennan looked like he was about to have a heart attack. I used the phone. I got the security desk. I arranged for my badge to be left at the front desk. And then I excused myself and went upstairs. But I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, listening to the murmur of voices downstairs. And I felt something cold and terrible settle in my chest. The next morning, Douglas left for work early. Once he was gone, I went to his study. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I just felt this overwhelming need to understand. The desk was locked, but I found the key in a drawer hidden in an envelope marked important. I opened the desk and began to look. What I found, my dears, what I found in that desk shattered my entire understanding of my marriage and my life. There were bank documents, internal audit reports that showed money hundreds of thousands of dollars being moved between accounts in ways that didn't align with any legitimate banking purpose. There were wire transfers to an account in Douglas's name in the Cayman Islands. There were records of loans that had been approved without proper documentation, then forgiven without explanation. But there was more, much more. There were photographs of Douglas and Father Brennan together in intimate situations, in hotel rooms, in what appeared to be a vacation property somewhere tropical. Photographs that made it abundantly clear that Douglas had been engaged in a romantic relationship with a Catholic priest for years. There were love letters, handwritten letters from Father Brennan expressing his devotion to Douglas, talking about our love and our future together. And there were documents related to child support payments, court records showing that Douglas had fathered a child with a woman named Sarah Chen in 1975, and that he'd been making monthly payments to support this child he'd never mentioned to me, a child I didn't even know existed. But the most damning items were the financial documents, a detailed ledger showing that Douglas and Father Brennan had embezzled over $2.3 million from the bank over a 5-year period, money that was supposed to be in customer accounts, money that had simply vanished. I sat on the floor of my husband's study, surrounded by the evidence of his secret life, and I felt something inside me break. Not gently, with a sound like shattering glass dot, when Douglas came home that evening. He found me sitting at his desk, surrounded by photographs and documents. He didn't deny it. He didn't even try to explain it away. He just looked at me with something like relief in his eyes, as if he'd been waiting for this moment for years. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry, Connie, but I can't live like this anymore." Over the next hours, the truth came out in fragments. Douglas had known since he was a teenager that he was attracted to men. He'd buried it, pushed it down, married me believing he could live a normal life. But he'd met Father Brennan 15 years ago, and they'd fallen in love. They'd been having an affair ever since. The embezzlement had started 5 years ago when Father Brennan's parish needed money for repairs. Douglas had helped him access church funds through the bank. Then it had become a pattern. They'd move money, cover it up, move it again. They'd created false accounts. They'd forged documents. The child support he'd had a brief relationship with a woman before me, and there was a child he'd been paying support, but he'd never told me because he didn't want me to know about his past. "I'm leaving," Douglas said finally. "I'm going away. I'm going to live as who I actually am. And I'm taking Father Brennan with me." He left that night. He packed a suitcase while I watched, too numb to stop him. By morning, he was gone. The scandal that followed was absolute. The bank discovered the embezzlement within days. The FBI became involved. There was a federal investigation. Customers lost their life savings. Families were destroyed. The bank collapsed. Douglas and Father Brennan were arrested at an airport in Boston, trying to flee to Canada. They were charged with federal crimes, wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering. They were sentenced to 7 years each in federal prison, and I became the wife who'd been blind to it all. The woman whose husband had stolen millions while she was at work. The woman whose marriage had been a complete lie. I lost my job at the hospital. "We've decided to go in a different direction," they said. I'd been there for 12 years. I had an exemplary record. It didn't matter. I was Douglas's wife, and Douglas was a criminal. The community treated me like I was complicit, like I should have known, like I should have seen what was happening right in front of me. Elizabeth withdrew from the University of Vermont. She couldn't bear the shame. Michael's Yale scholarship was rescinded, they said. They didn't want the association with the scandal. Sarah became withdrawn, stopped talking to her friends, stopped participating in activities she loved. We had to sell the house. Our assets were frozen. The money Douglas and Father Brennan had stolen was the subject of a lengthy legal battle. In the end, I received almost nothing. I was starting over at 55 years old with 3 devastated children and no income. I started working as a home health aide in June 1988. I'd care for elderly people in their homes, bathing them, feeding them, helping them with their medications. It paid $8 an hour. I'd work 8, sometimes 10 hours a day, but that wasn't enough. So I started cleaning houses in the evenings. Dirty, exhausting work. On my hands and knees scrubbing other people's bathrooms. By the end of the first month, my hands were raw, cracked, bleeding between the knuckles. I'd wrap them in bandages and keep working. I also started baking. Bread, pies, cookies, anything I could make cheaply that might sell. I'd deliver them to local restaurants, to the grocery store, anywhere that might buy them. $5 for a pie, 50 cents for cookies. It wasn't much, but it added up. By July 1988, I was working 70 hours a week and making approximately $1,800 a month. That was barely enough for rent and food for 4 people, but we managed, just barely. Elizabeth worked as a restaurant hostess while she took community college classes. She was trying to rebuild her life, her confidence, her sense of self. Michael got a job at a hardware store. He gave me most of his paycheck. Sarah became withdrawn, but academically focused. She threw herself into her studies as a way to escape the reality of our situation. I was exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix. I'd come home from caring for elderly people, my body aching, my hands hurting, and I'd immediately start baking for the next day. I'd do this 6 days a week. On Sundays, I'd collapse. My hair turned gray, not gradually, seemingly overnight. It all turned gray. The stress aged me 10 years in 1 year. I looked in the mirror sometimes and didn't recognize the woman looking back. But I kept going. I had to. My children needed me. And I discovered something surprising. I was strong. I was so much stronger than I'd ever imagined I could be. By 1989, a year into this nightmare, I had expanded my baking business. I was supplying bread and pastries to 3 local restaurants. I was making nearly $2,000 a month from all my combined work. That was survival. That was keeping us alive. By 1990, 2 years later, I'd saved enough to buy a small commercial kitchen space. I started Connie's Kitchen, a small bakery and cafe where I sold bread, pastries, and simple meals. I worked 80 hours a week, but I was building something that was mine. The moment came in September 1991, a community fundraiser for the elementary school. They were auctioning off donated baked goods and homemade items to raise money for the library. I donated 6 pies and 3 loaves of bread, not really expecting anyone to buy them. I was still, in many people's minds, that woman whose husband is a criminal, still tainted, still guilty by association. An elderly woman stood up during the auction. Her name was Margaret Aldrich. She was 87 years old, one of the oldest residents of Maple Ridge. She'd lived in the town her entire life. She had the respect and love of everyone. "I want to say something," Mrs. Aldrich said, and the room went quiet. "I've known Connie Fitzgerald for the past 13 years, she said. I watched her marriage. I watched her believe in her husband. I watched her be betrayed in the most public, humiliating way possible. And I've watched her response to that betrayal. She's worked every single day. She's kept her children fed and clothed and educated. She's built a business from nothing. And I want this community to know that Connie is one of the strongest people I've ever met. She bid $100 for one of my pies. Then she bid $150 for another. By the time the auction ended, she'd spent nearly $1,000 on my baked goods. And something shifted. People began to see me differently, not as the victim of a scandal, but as a survivor, not as the wife of a criminal, but as a woman who'd overcome something devastating. By 1993, 5 years after Douglas left, I had 3 locations of Connie's Kitchen. I had 60 employees. I was supplying bread and pastries to restaurants across Vermont and New Hampshire. Elizabeth graduated from community college and went to the University of Vermont. She became a business administrator. She now runs a major food distribution company. Michael went to community college, then transferred to the University of Vermont. He became an accountant determined to live an ethical life in a profession his father had destroyed. He works for a nonprofit organization now, helping people recover from financial fraud. Sarah graduated from high school at the top of her class. She went to Middlebury College. She became a therapist specializing in helping people who've experienced family trauma and betrayal. The business continued to grow. By 2000, I had 5 locations and 150 employees. I was recognized by the Vermont Business Council as one of the state's most successful entrepreneurs. I was featured in national magazines as an example of resilience and determination. The grandchildren started arriving in the late 1990s. Elizabeth's 2 sons, Michael's daughter and son, Sarah's daughter. I held each of them, and I marveled at where I'd come from a woman who didn't recognize herself in the mirror to a woman who'd built an empire. From absolutely nothing. In 2004, I received the Maple Ridge Community Service Award. There was a photograph in the newspaper of me holding the award, and I was smiling, genuinely smiling. The smile of a woman who'd survived the darkest betrayal and emerged stronger, wiser, more whole. Douglas was released from federal prison in 1995. He and Father Brennan had served their time. According to newspaper reports, they moved to San Francisco together and lived quietly. I heard years later that Father Brennan died of AIDS in 2001. Douglas is still alive, as far as I know, living in California with a new partner. I don't wish him ill, but I don't forgive him either. Looking back now, at 76 years old, I understand that living with a stranger for 20 years didn't destroy me. It liberated me. It forced me to discover who I actually was, separate from who I'd been told to be. You know, my dears, I spent 20 years being the wife of a powerful man. I made myself smaller to accommodate him. I didn't ask questions because I didn't want to seem jealous or controlling. I accepted explanations that didn't quite add up because I wanted to trust him. I sacrificed my own instincts and my own voice at the altar of matrimony. When the truth came out, when I discovered that I'd been married to a stranger, I had a choice. I could have given up. I could have let shame consume me. I could have believed that I was somehow complicit in his crimes because I hadn't seen them coming. Instead, I chose to rebuild. I chose to work 70 hours a week if that's what it took. I chose to get my hands raw and bloody if that meant I could keep my children safe. I chose to create something beautiful from the ashes of my destroyed marriage. The woman who looked back at me from the mirror in 1988 was frightened and small. The woman who looks back now is strong and wise. She's built an empire with her own hands. She's raised children who've become healers and builders and protectors. She's proven that you don't need a man to define you. You don't need a husband to give your life meaning. You can build meaning yourself. You can create beauty yourself. You can survive anything. I want to tell you something, my dears. If you're living with someone and something doesn't feel right, trust that feeling. If you're being told not to ask questions, ask them anyway. If you're making yourself smaller to accommodate someone else, stop. Don't wait for a dramatic revelation to change your life. Change it yourself, But if the revelation comes anyway, if you discover that you've been living with a stranger, know this: you will survive. You will build something beautiful. You will become someone you never imagined you could be. The stranger I lived with for 20 years taught me the most important lesson of my life: that I am enough, that I don't need anyone else to validate my existence or give my life meaning, that I am capable of creating beauty and abundance and strength from absolutely nothing. Thank you for listening to me today. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next stories. Share with someone who might be needing a little hope. Where are you watching from? Leave it in the comments. I read every single one, and your messages bring me such joy. God bless you, my dears, and thank you for letting me share this story with you.